Welcome to today's explainer. So, I want you to imagine a guy who has literally achieved absolutely everything society tells us we're supposed to strive for. He's got immense fame, incredible wealth, this massive, beautiful estate, and a loving family. Actually, scratch that. From the outside, his life isn't just good, it's a flawless masterpiece. But internally, he is suddenly and completely stripped of all joy, just plummeting into a dark, suffocating abyss. We aren't talking about a fictional character here. This was the actual reality for Leo Tolstoy, the absolute mastermind behind literary giants like War and Peace. Today, we're diving into the story of a wildly successful man who lost everything on the inside, and the fascinating, really intense journey he took to find it all again.
It all started with these deeply haunting questions. Why am I here? What is my life's purpose? And really, why should I care about anything if it's all just going to end anyway? Just imagine those thoughts hitting you like a freight train out of nowhere. That is the exact, suffocating existential dread that slammed into Leo Tolstoy right around the time he hit 50. The guy who had lived life to the absolute fullest, soaking up everything that brought him pleasure, suddenly watched every ounce of his happiness just completely evaporate. He was entirely consumed by hopelessness. He wrote something to the effect of, "If not now, then tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then in 30 years, doesn't make any difference." The sheer genius who wrote some of the greatest literature in human history was basically reduced to a state of mental spiraling. He even described himself as becoming almost like an emotional toddler, just endlessly asking, why? Why life? Why death? He genuinely started to believe there was something fundamentally broken inside his own soul. Okay, let's just trace this out real quick because his life was a study in extreme contrast. Back in the 1830s, his early life was hit hard by tragedy. Losing his parents young left him feeling totally abandoned, which led to this deep skepticism and religious disillusionment. But then, for decades through the 60s and 70s, he has this astronomical rise, massive literary success, wealth, a growing family. He lived for nearly 50 years seemingly untouched by major worries. And then boom, age 50, this sudden violent crash into a deep intellectual and existential crisis. The weight of his thoughts got so heavy that sleep became his literally only escape. It was the only temporary relief he could get from his own brain. Section 1. The failure of intellect. At this point, he was desperate enough to trick himself into not taking his own life. And so, what does a brilliant mind do when it's facing a crisis? Well, it tries to think its way out, right? But his massive intellect totally failed him here. He turned to the heavy hitters of philosophy, Socrates, Buddha, Solomon, but all he found was this grim conclusion that death is better than life, and that the happiest person is the one who was never born at all. Yikes, no comfort there. So he pivots to science. But to Tolstoy, science and Darwinism basically just said humans are accidental creations, just these lumps of energy that are only valuable when healthy, and destined to die anyway. Neither profound philosophy nor cutting-edge science offered even a single drop of purpose for his haunted mind. Section 2. The Parable of Dread. To really wrap our heads around the claustrophobic terror of Tolstoy's psychological state, we have to talk about the centerpiece of his essay, A Confession. Picture this. A man is running for his life, desperately fleeing from this ferocious, wild beast. This beast represents the inescapable anxiety of existential dread, just hunting him from above. To escape it, the man blindly throws himself down into an abandoned well. But as he's falling into the darkness, he looks down, and there's a literal dragon at the very bottom of the well, waiting with its jaws wide open. That dragon, that's the absolute inevitability of death. So in sheer panic, the guy grabs onto a single branch growing out of the side of the well, and he's just hopelessly trapped there, in the middle, dread roaring above him, death snapping below him. But here is the most agonizing detail of the whole shebang. As he's clinging to this branch for dear life, he notices a few drops of sweet honey on its leaves. Despite the monster above and the dragon below, he reaches out his tongue and licks the honey. To Tolstoy, that honey represented the fleeting, temporary distractions and pleasures of life that briefly, oh so briefly, mask the absolute terror of our prediction. Section 3. 4 Flawed Escapes. So hanging out in this terrifying metaphorical well, Tolstoy started looking around at his wealthy intellectual peers to figure out how on earth they were dealing with the beast and the dragon. He narrowed it down to 4 distinct coping mechanisms: absurdism, Epicureanism, suicide, and existential limbo. And spoiler alert,
Tolstoy examined and ultimately rejected every single one of them. First up, we've got absurdism. This is super similar to the philosophy of Albert Camus. It's basically adopting an attitude of defiance. You acknowledge life is absurd and you say, so what? You just ignore the dread, try not to overthink it, and go have coffee with your family. But Tolstoy wasn't buying it. He argued that a fully functioning mind can't just play dumb and suppress the truth of mortality forever. Eventually, whether through personal struggle or losing someone you love, the weight of that nihilism is going to overtake you. It's just not a lasting fix.
Then there is Epicureanism, which connects right back to our parable. This is the endless pursuit of material wealth, entertainment, and indulgence just to distract yourself from life's meaninglessness. Tolstoy saw this as exactly like licking those drops of honey in the well. Sure, it's sweet for a fleeting second, but it's ultimately just a massive distraction from reality. Living solely for pleasure creates this endless, unsatisfying loop that never actually answers those big, deep questions.
The third group he observed were those who just lacked the strength to carry on. They were so overwhelmed by the absurdity of it all that they chose to end their own lives, seeing it as the only way to end a silly joke. Now, while Tolstoy impartially documented this as a path that some people took, he just couldn't embrace it for himself. And I think it really goes without saying, if you ever find yourself in a crisis like that, please reach out and keep moving forward, fight through it, and keep searching for answers, just like Tolstoy did.
And finally, the fourth escape, existential limbo. This is a state of total passive resignation. Folks in this group recognize the futility of existence, but they don't have the hope or the energy to do anything about it. They don't reject life, but they definitely don't embrace it either. Tolstoy viewed this as a kind of spiritual exhaustion. It leaves you totally numb, just emotionally and spiritually paralyzed. To him, existing in this suspended state of standstill was hands down the weakest way you could possibly live.
Section 4. The Leap of Faith. Having totally rejected all four of his peers' escapes and striking out with science and philosophy, Tolstoy felt like he was entirely out of options. But then a real game changer happened. He shifted his focus to the uneducated peasantry. In Tolstoy's circle, you had these incredibly wealthy intellectuals paralyzed by despair. But the peasantry, they were facing immense, bone-crushing physical hardship every single day, and yet they were anchored by this unwavering faith. Their simple belief gave them a resilience and a purpose that the elite logic of Tolstoy's peers had completely failed to deliver.
So here is the magnificent realization. Tolstoy recognized that you absolutely cannot understand or solve the meaning of life using just logic and reason. You need faith. Specifically, a belief in the infinite to transcend the limitations of our finite world. Even though human suffering is temporary, trusting in something greater than the material world, which for him was the eternal presence of God, offered a higher purpose that reason alone could literally never map out. Even if his rational brain saw it as a leap without hard evidence, it was the only path that actually resulted in true peace. And he didn't just write a nice essay about this and call it a day, he lived it. Tolstoy completely transformed his entire life based on this realization. Step 1, he surrendered his massive ego and his reliance on pure intellect. Step 2, he adopted a much simpler way of living. Step 3, he committed himself to humility and serving the poor. He actually started giving away a lot of his wealth to live modestly. Now, as you might imagine, his family was not exactly thrilled about that radical move. But for Tolstoy, it was the only way to genuinely align his life with his newfound anchor. And you know what? It worked. After this incredibly intense period of struggle, adjustment, and totally redefining his worldview, Tolstoy spent his remaining decades living honestly and devotedly. He finally found the peace that had completely eluded him at the absolute height of his fame. He passed away peacefully in 1910 at the age of 82. The man who was ready to surrender to the dragon at age 50 had found his cure, and it gave him another 3 decades of deeply meaningful life. Tolstoy's journey from absolute dread to profound peace is such a fascinating mirror for us today. It leaves us with a really challenging thought to consider. If raw intellect, ultimate success, and all the material wealth in the world are not enough to give life meaning, what is your anchor when you find yourself in the well? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this deep dive into Tolstoy's search for meaning leaves you with something profound to think about today.